Good evening. My name's Judy Koch. I'm the Elizabeth and Richard Curry Chief of Public Programming and Learning here at the AGO, and I'm happy to be spending my Wednesday night with you. I love Wednesdays at the museum. We have hip-hop lessons going on downstairs in case you're in the wrong room. And we have a gallery full of people, and here we are tonight for this event. So I welcome you this evening, acknowledging that we are on Mississauga territory and that this land has been home to the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe through time. The purpose of our evening is to introduce all of you to our new director, the Sonja and Michael Koerner, director and CEO of the AGO, Stephan Jost, who on Saturday will have been here 2 months. So 60 days. And so his impressions of the city and his ideas about art in the museum will be shared with you this evening. And we decided to do that to structure this as a conversation so that it feels a bit like he's sitting in your actual living room having a conversation with you. And in fact, there are people at home watching. We're doing a webcast of this, so there are people in their living room sitting and watching this evening. And Stephan will be joined this evening by our own Sean O'Neill, who's our Associate Director of Adult Programming and Partnerships here at the AGO. That's his day job. Well, kind of his day job and his evening job and his weekend job. But in addition to this job, Sean is also the host of a show on CBC called Crash Gallery that's all about art. So he's well positioned to help us this evening facilitate this conversation. Because he's a staff member, we decided to give him an immunity chip so he can ask the hard questions without any fear that he won't have a job tomorrow. So, after the conversation, we're going to talk for about 40 minutes, and then after the conversation, we'll open up the floor to questions from you, the audience, and actually questions from people who are online. So please join me in welcoming Sean O'Neill and Stephan Jost.
Hello, Stephan.
Hello, good evening.
Can we still say welcome to the AGO?
Sure, why not? You can say that in 20 years,
welcome to the AGO. Stephan, I want to start at the very beginning. You grew up in East Lansing, Michigan.
That's right.
Two Swiss immigrants.
Yes.
Your father a botany professor and your mother a ceramicist.
Plant molecular biologist, but that's fine, yeah.
That's enough. Can you give us a sense of what your childhood was like? What was growing up in East Lansing, Michigan like?
So, East Lansing is a one high school town, 35,000 people, home to Michigan State University. So very intellectual community, a very stable community, and a progressive community, but located in kind of a world which was industrial and losing industrialization fast. So Lansing, Michigan is declining rapidly, where the community of East Lansing was pretty stable. I actually really enjoyed my childhood, but every summer we'd go back to Switzerland, so it's kind of...
So are you Swiss or are you American?
I made the decision when I was in 6th or 7th grade to be American, because it's very difficult to be Swiss and something else, but it's very easy to be American and something else. So that said, both parts are very much who I am, and I still carry both passports.
And you have siblings, 2 siblings?
Yeah, my brother's a farmer. He runs an organic farm, asparagus, chicken, and sheep, south of East Lansing, Grass Lake, 250 people. And my sister is a rock musician, plays the electric cello, New York City, Chelsea. She's much cooler than I am. Much, much cooler.
And did you grow up loving art, knowing art? Was your mother your entry into art? What was the first moment in your life when you kind of knew you wanted to be with art?
So I had a slightly unconventional childhood. No TV, no popular culture. Saw my first movie at 16.
What movie?
Dolly Parton's 9 to 5. So making art, being around art, going to museums was very, very much part of... I thought a normal Saturday was like to go to the Toledo Museum of Art with your dad, even though it was a 2-hour drive. I just That just was normal. My father's a scientist, but he probably still today knows more art history than I do.
And was there a moment? Was there a work that you saw in Toledo? Was there something that just kind of opened you up and blew your mind and changed your life?
Yeah. So again, a little unconventional childhood. I couldn't see a movie, but it was okay for me to hitchhike around Europe alone. Okay. So
At what age?
I did that 16. I was in Colmar, which is in France. There's a great piece called the Isenheim Altarpiece there by Matthias Grunewald, which is just mind-blowing piece. And it's a piece that was designed for a place where people were dying of the plague. And I was just thinking about just life, death, all those big questions, and it just was perfectly placed. And it's still, I think, the most profound work.
Well, let's fast forward a little bit. You did a bachelor's degree in art history at Hampshire College. Am I right?
Yes.
Focusing on Dutch and Flemish art?
Yeah, Hampshire, no grades, no required courses, on the board, changed my life, love the school. If you've got a quirky kid or grandkid, think about it.
Very good. And then from there you went on to do your MA in photographic history in the University of Texas, Austin. Is that correct?
6 million photographs, including the world's first photograph, went where the art is, loved Texas, went there with a really bad attitude after 4 great years in New York City, and went to Texas with kind of a chip on my shoulder, and 2 weeks later I was like, this is amazing, it's great. So Austin is fantastic, great things in their collection, fantastic program where the students and faculty actually liked each other, and that was really kind of, I think, it was a fun place to study, and it was kind of that popcorn atmosphere where everybody's learning from everybody, and Austin is just talk about a culture that is creative and dynamic. It really was great.
And then you became a curator.
Curator of academic programs and exhibitions at Oberlin College. Actually, the reality is my first job was an 8-month grant-funded position to do research for a CD-ROM. We picked the wrong medium. Like, who uses CD-ROMs?
They're vintage now. They're, like, cool again.
What's that?
It's like vinyl. CD-ROM will come back.
Yeah, CD-ROMs are going to come back at some point. But we did a lot of research and then was able to kind of construct my own job there. And that was basically to be the guy between the museum and non-art history departments. So they have a fantastic museum at Oberlin, really incredible. It's really one of the top American private colleges. And so I would do about 60 lectures a year geared towards non-art history students. So you might look at the history with original works of art. So you might look at, say, the history of the female nude from, the medieval times to today through great works of art, and have a conversation about how the ideal of the human body changes. And then when you look at it historically, it's really obvious that we're in a extreme moment, like 6'2" and 93 pounds. It's completely insane. But to see that within a historic context really hits that point home. And for kind of a feminist women's studies class, that's actually important to have that conversation.
So at what point then, as a curator, did you know that you wanted to be the boss?
I'm still friends with my undergraduate professor from Hampshire. And she still remembers the conversation because it was a little weird. Second semester freshman year, I walked into her office and told her I wanted to be a museum director. I was a curator to become a director. I knew that the intention wasn't to be a curator. It was I knew that from 18 and a half, 19.
How did you know that?
Good question. Part of it is I'm very dyslexic. And so the idea of sitting and writing a dissertation, not my strong suit. I'm super social. So the idea of doing endless scholarly research, other people are going to do that better than me. And I actually like how complex systems work. And I also like fundraising. So I had a conversation with a fundraiser my first year at college, and I thought, this is cool. This is great. Yeah. Who I'm still in touch with as well. So, yeah.
Well, speaking of, I guess that, I'm thinking a little bit about mentorship, and I'm wondering, who for you has been your greatest mentor, and what was the lesson they taught you?
So, great question. I think mentorship actually is what made the difference. Morrison Heckscher Met him as an undergraduate. I was interning at the Metropolitan Museum of Art.
Who is he, for people who don't know?
So he is he was the director of the American wing of the Metropolitan Museum in New York. I was in Dutch and Flemish painting, but I met him as a summer intern. We clicked, really liked his wife, went on vacation with him every year from senior year of college with him and his wife to 3 years ago we stopped going because, we've got a daughter and we were living in Hawaii. But that's what made the difference. Friendship / mentorship from Maury Heckscher. And I think that long-term mentorship is, you scratch the surface and everybody who's almost everybody who's successful in this field had somebody senior paying attention between the ages of 25 and 35 to them. Somebody senior specifically paying attention to them. And I think when I look at how are we going to diversify the field, all these really incredible things we have to do, I think it's having somebody senior pay specific attention over the course of at least 10 years, not quick. It's real.
What was the most kind of mind-blowing or practice-changing thing that he taught you?
It is about the object. It is about the works of art. That's one thing. That stories are incredibly important. That objects come alive when stories are told about them, and that there's multiple stories and multiple narratives around any object, and that's what can make them meaningful, powerful, and change people's lives.
It's great.
Plus, he's just nice. He's not a jerk.
Being nice is nice.
Yes.
Yeah. So, as you mentioned, you're married. You're married to a man.
Yeah.
A local.
Will. He's right there.
Hi, Will.
We've got a 5-year-old daughter.
Monique.
Yes, Monique. Yeah.
You live in Toronto.
We do now.
A place,
Yes.
I think, where generations of some amazing queer people have fought to create a pretty safe space.
Yeah. It's not by mistake.
And I've been thinking about this question in the context of the events a few days ago, and I'm curious, as somebody who came of age in the 80s and 90s, did you meet resistance when it came to your sexuality? How did your experience of your sexuality shape you and inform who you are?
Sure, great questions. First of all, I kind of knew it probably in like first or second grade, so it's not any new news to me. I am of the generation, I was born in '69, so right when HIV/AIDS hit, and there was a lot of hysteria, as middle school, high school, was also the time where I was kind of grappling with this, and so my response to that was actually one of political activation and anger, and realizing that if well-intended good people don't take authority, somebody else will. So it was actually empowering. And I told my family at 18, and my mom's response was, "I figured you'd tell me when you were ready." It was just not news. It was like, oh, okay. So I was actually also in Hampshire was very progressive, so I was in a very kind of. That said, having friends die of HIV and AIDS, becoming an expert in mourning in your early 20s, that kind of stuff, don't wish it on anybody, but. When I meet somebody who's just become a widow, I actually have empathy, and I do know on a certain level what's going on. So I do feel like it gave me a set of emotional skills, and however you want to call that, that's been great. It's made the world it maybe allows one to enter situations a little bit more generously.
Great. So I'm going to fast forward again, and up until 2 months ago, you were the director of the Honolulu Museum of Art.
Yes.
You were there for 5 years.
Yes.
And according to the news reports, you dealt with a financial crisis, you grew the operation, you doubled membership,
Yeah.
you had a successful tenure.
Yeah.
And I think when you were announced, a lot of us were looking around, it was February or March, thinking, why would you ever leave Hawaii?
So first of all, to be really, really clear, museums are team sports. I did not do the things at Honolulu alone. I helped align a bunch of people to work for a common good, but I certainly don't want to take credit for the successes we had because there are 180 people working really hard to make things happen. Like here, we're 650 people on staff. I barely know what's going on in most parts of the organization, yet most parts are doing great. Probably better because I'm not aware of what's going on. So Will and I had a conversation about next step. We were very, very happy in Honolulu. It is a beautiful place, The weather is perfect. Culturally, it's really interesting. But really, the reason you live in Honolulu is because of the people. They are phenomenal, phenomenal people. So I kind of said, well, the next move would be maybe a top 10 museum in North America, right? And Will kind of said, here are the cities that I would be interested in, he would be willing to live in. And so it was, there was a set of cities, top 10 museum. I really thought it would take 5 to 12 years to find the next job, and I was okay with that. But if something came up within that rubric, I'd apply for it. And so, well, something did come up and I got it. So, well, we left sooner than
And you went after this job.
What's that?
You went after this job. They
Yes,
didn't come to you.
Yeah.
You
Well,
went
legally they couldn't because the headhunter who they were working with here had placed me in Honolulu, so they couldn't approach me. So I had a signal that I was interested because they couldn't.
And was the process a tough process, getting hired?
It was a fantastic process, a really good process.
How so?
So Maxine is the chair of the board, and she ran the search with Bob Harding. And so it's very kind of odd. You get dropped in. You leave, jump on a plane Saturday afternoon, arrive here Sunday. We're closer to Moscow than Honolulu right now. I mean, Honolulu's out there. Then you kind of land Sunday midday, Sunday downtown Toronto, grab something to eat, go to sleep, wake up with jet lag at 2 in the morning, stress out, then walk into an 8 o'clock meeting where you get interviewed for, 90 minutes. And it's an anonymous office, not here because it's all confidential. And then you jump back on a plane and fly back. And you do that 3 times in a row kind of thing. But Maxine ran a very fair search. They were very clear. Everybody at the table got to ask questions. There was real discussion. And I was so exhausted that I think they saw what I didn't have any energy to put up any airs. I was just like this is what you're going to get because I can't fake it right now. I'm just way too tired. And then you're pretending like you're sick every Monday, right? When you land and have to go back to work. So it was a.
So we'll know what you're doing if you're sick on a Monday.
Yeah. Give me 20 years, please. yeah. But it was a really good process, and it was the board is super here, really great.
So it's been 2 months, as Judy said. You've been in Toronto and you've been at the AGO. What is the best art experience you've had here so far?
At the AGO?
Sure. Yeah.
I still think the Henry Moore is a home run. I really do. I know it's not fashionable, cool, or edgy, but the space and the art together look extraordinary. And it's not even like Henry Moore, I wouldn't say is on my top 10, right? But he's really, really good, and how it's shown is really good. So, I mean, I think that would be, yeah, I know it's but yeah, it's good.
It's good work. Yeah. Quick question. You're one of many non-Canadians recently appointed to key Canadian arts leadership positions over the past couple of years here in Toronto and across the country. How important is a knowledge of local and national contexts to a leadership job like yours, and how do you learn what you don't know? First of all, you learn by saying very publicly in the Globe and Mail that you don't know anything about Canadian art, and guess what happens? Everybody tells you about Canadian art. So, so yes, you got to signal like, hey, I got something to learn here. There's pluses and minuses, and it depends on the institution and the situation. I've gotten this question like all the time. It's been really interesting. Canadians have a thing about Americans. I got it. I've got to think about Americans too sometimes, but it's the fact is that Toronto is a global city. We're playing globally on many, many different levels, and we will continue to play globally on many different levels. And I mean, the truth is that Mark Mayer didn't apply for the job. He's the head of the National Gallery, right? So yeah, he would have been the natural hire. I got lucky. He didn't apply, right? So I also think there's sometimes an advantage to be a little bit on the outside because you can kind of see things maybe a little bit differently. And I think that's generally speaking a strong point. And it's interesting because, San Francisco just hired a German, the Met is run by an English person, and Boston is run by a Canadian. So,
probably a third of the major museums in the United States are run by non-Americans, and I think there's something healthy about that.
Stephan, Jost, why is art important?
Because it changes people's lives and builds social fabric that we desperately need. And it allows us to experience other cultures, judging those cultures on the best, not the worst of them. That'd be my short answer.
We'll take
Some
it.
of it's sexy too.
Yeah, that's good.
Right.
So museums today, there's a lot of critique that happens around museums today, particularly around the way that art museums in general can enact their colonial histories. Museums can be perceived as slow to change, perceived as kind of have a resistance to decentering their perspectives. Obviously, in your role, you believe in the social purpose and the future of museums. Why?
So that's a whole bunch of different questions. One thing embedded in that question is museums are colonial institutions, and my answer to that is yes. They're also Enlightenment institutions, and there's also the educational institutions, right? So, it's yes, and it's complicated is the short answer. It's interesting to go back to like the 1970s and like read the museum literature from that period. And everybody is talking about access and how they need to be more inclusive and they need to get more people in the door. And if you look at the museums, art museums in particular, we've been astoundingly successful in doing that. I mean, we're
doing what?
Bringing people in the door. I mean, the Metropolitan Museum's getting 5-6 million people a year, the Tate, et cetera, et cetera. So actually the biggest challenge for many major museums, and I think it will be our challenge as well, is actually dealing with capacity. Can we actually meet the level of interest and demand that people are coming in, and can we respond to it? Because that's going to be a very diverse set of people coming in the door. So in Honolulu, the membership expanded pretty dramatically, and when I left, and again, big team effort, the majority of the members were under 40 and non-white. Okay, so that's a very different set of, I think we're right on the cusp of that here in the next 5 or 10 years. There's a very strong affiliation and ease for the under 40 crowd with visual culture, right? It's all about the internet. It's all about images, right? That's what we do well. So they're different cultural institutions, and sometimes they're like, oh, cultural institutions are failing, or they're not going to engage the next generation. That's not going to be the AGO's challenge. The AGO challenge is going to be, can we manage the level of interest that we're going to have?
And how do you ensure that that interest is peaked?
There's a lot of different strategies that have to, so there's what I like to call access. That's the thing I've been drumming here for the last 8 weeks, is how you make people feel welcome and how you reduce barriers for entry, and simultaneously, and how you get engagement that's lifelong, right? You want somebody to be engaged with the institution for much of their life. So there's pricing issues. $150 for a family membership is too much, right? Some people can afford it, and some people understand the value of it, but it's going to be people who know the value and value art museums who are going to spend that. It's not necessarily going to be the person who, may have the resources to do it, but doesn't have art museum going as their cultural background. They're not going to invest $150 right up front. So we've got to have different strategies for that. And then the biggest thing is social media. I mean, right now we can do a tweet from the AGO and send it out. Just our followers on Twitter are 225,000. I mean, so if I say something pithy and funny, which I don't do that often, 225,000 people can get it right away, which is just mind-blowing.
Are you going to hire somebody to follow you around and tweet what you say?
It's funny. We, social media is this kind of, so Facebook is, I use personally. Stephan Jost at AGO is kind of going to be the Instagram feed. And I think Instagram is probably my medium. So if you're on Instagram, that's one. I'm super dyslexic, so Twitter sucks for me because I'm misspelling everything. And we did try in Honolulu. Somebody kind of, the social media person tried to create an interesting narrative out of my life, and it failed miserably, much to my relief. And the reality is I'm going from an HR meeting to a finance meeting to a meeting of the foundation board to a curatorial meeting. it's not nearly as glamorous as people think it is. A lot of it is just, making sure the institution's moving in the right direction. So Twitter is not my medium, and my day-to-day actions aren't that interesting.
I want to talk a little bit about artists, and I'll start with the slide. Zoe, can you pull up the slide? Thank you. These are two pie charts that were published last year by Canadian Art Magazine, and they did a wide-ranging survey of public institutions in Canada, and they were looking at the demographics of solo exhibitions within these institutions. And on the left, you see the average. And you'll see in Canada, over the preceding 3 years, so 2013, 2014, 2015, 56% of the solo exhibitions were by white male artists, 8% by non-white male artists, 33% by white female artists, and 3% by non-white female artists. And then Canadian Art went a step further and broke out leading public institutions by province. And you can see the AGO stats to the right. 60% of our exhibitions over 3 years featured white male artists, 15 non-white male artists, 25% white female artists, and no non-white female artists. Stephan, what do you make of these numbers?
Let me answer this in another way.
Sure.
So, when I was in my 20s, living in New York City, working at Sotheby's during the day, an AIDS activist at night, I fell in love with contemporary art. And I look back now at the artists that I loved, and, basically a third of them died of AIDS. And if you look at those artists' work, they're actually well studied. There's books about them. There's been exhibitions about those artists. A third are kind of rock star superstars doing great, selling at Gagosian, $1 million a pop, blah, blah, blah. And a third are still making great work and don't even have dealers. And the difference between the third that are doing well and the third who aren't is gender. That's it, right? That people like, who I'd say, somebody like Shazia Sikander, who I think is an extraordinary artist, not a good artist, but really, really, really extraordinary, doesn't have a dealer now. That's insane, right? And then some other artists who I won't name, who are pretty mediocre, are selling for $1 million. So this is actually an active conversation that I'm having with Stephanie, who's chief curator. We're very well positioned to change this pie chart, and I think you should hold me accountable publicly if I don't do it within 4 years. How's about that?
What do you think? Yeah. 4 years.
And this pie chart looks even worse if you look at acquisitions based on dollar value. So that 60% white male artist is going to go to 95% white male artist when you look at the dollars. And, sometimes I'm not a Marxist, but there's something to be said about that Marxist thing of follow the money, because yeah.
So maybe we'll take this conversation and broaden it out a bit. Zoe, you can take the slide down now. Thank you. Earlier this year, the BBC did a study which confirmed what many of us already know, that Toronto is, by many measures and most measures, the most diverse city in the world. Some numbers they threw out: 51% of our residents were born outside of Canada. Our city is home to 230 different nationalities. 47% of our population have a mother tongue that is neither English nor French. To what extent do you feel that the diverse communities of our city should see themselves reflected in the art on the walls of the AGO?
There's multiple layers to that too, right? That question. So I think we've got to set a 25-year goal, and something that's kind of big and audacious, that our audience, our membership, our board, our staff should reflect the diversity of the city. That would be a good goal, right? So that's important. I do think that having a diverse program is very, very important. Simultaneously, I think that we need to really make sure we're focusing on excellence. This isn't just about inclusion. Inclusion's part of that conversation, but it doesn't do anybody a service to lower standards or change standards, basically, to reach that goal. And I think it's really important that we look at a global conversation. It's not just about the people who live here, but it's about, doesn't take a rocket science to figure out that capital, cultural power, global influence isn't moving towards Asia, it's moved towards Asia. I used to quip in Honolulu that our strategic plan was China, 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 and India. That was our strategic plan, right? That we really, if we're going to be a global player, we need to understand these global shifts, and we need to engage in those through artistic excellence, Ai Weiwei, et cetera, right? But it's key.
How do you define artistic excellence?
Great question, right? So, and it's that kind of, on one hand, there's how something is made. I'm still a little bit of a conservative. I care how things are made, okay? I also really care about the ideas, the content, but ultimately I'm looking at two things, which is how does the artwork help us see something in a new light? And sometimes that new light, once you get it, is like, oh, that's obvious. Like, right, Warhol's talking about consumerism. Oh my God, I'm a consumer, right? That easy, right? But he's changing the lens that we look in the world. So that's, I think, really important. And then how people frame the conversation. How does a group of artists, and it's almost always a group of artists who are framing an important conversation. I mean, Edward Bertinsky, photographer, happens to be from Toronto, right? He's framing a global conversation about the environment and industrial production, and he's showing it literally. Yes, it's aesthetic and it's seductive and beautiful, but I think it's important because he's framing a conversation.
It's interesting that you sort of talked about the China, India strategic plan. I know that's not your actual strategic plan, but do you think then, in terms of an institution like the AGO and our approach to inclusion and diversity, are you thinking about kind of multiplicity of communities and perspectives all at the same time, or do you feel like you would plan to take a kind of staggered approach, thinking about one community at a time relative to how you open up the institution?
Multiplicity. There's this tendency to say, oh, we want to get the XYZ community involved, so let's do a show of that community. That's not bad, but if there's not a follow-up, if there's not a sustained thing there, and I'm noticing, and I have zero hard evidence, but I'm noticing that through observation that younger folks in some ways are much more flexible when it comes to their taste and engagement in art. So the older crowd in Honolulu was either, we like Asian art, we like American art, we like art of Hawaii, or we like modern and contemporary art, and very clearly sliced into those programs. But, you know, we had this really great donor. She was from Persia, Iranian, and she really wanted to have a Nowruz festival. Nowruz is the Persian New Year. We went all out. We had a Persian show, Persian music, you know, DJs from LA who were kind of great young hip Persian DJ, and we had, you know, 2,500 people totally engaged in Nowruz and the Persian culture, and like maybe 6 of them were Persian, right? And next year they're saying, well, why aren't we doing Persian New Year again, right? It was just, they were totally open. And that's, I think, the really exciting thing about kind of the millennial crowd is if you create the cultural experience, they want content, they want a social thing, but they're open. So the idea that somebody that, as a Swiss guy, I should be, you're going to get me because you got, you know, a Swiss artist, Giacometti. Yeah, I like Giacometti, but not every day, you know.
Fair enough. Last question on this. On that sort of 25-year timeline, and if you have that 25-year goal in mind, what are the things that need to happen in the first 3 years to get the strategy started?
As a conference, and there was a woman who, I'm afraid I don't remember her name, but we were, AMD, which is the Art Museum Directors Group, was meeting in Cleveland, and there was a woman from Toronto who was speaking there. And a lot of people were talking, a lot of things, but the thing that really stuck out, you know, when somebody says one thing and you're like, yeah, she said, well, what you're talking about, inclusion, it's about relentless incrementalism. It's just, you know, it's just constant, just moving that ball, no dramatic, it's just always a little bit in the right direction, right? So that kind of stuck with me as just kind of a, and I'm sorry I don't know her name because she's from Toronto and I'm totally stealing it, but it was good, and I think true.
We'll tweet it later.
Yeah, so they're in terms of our, like, okay, next 3 years, zooming in for the museum to really focus on 3 things. We're going to do a collection reinstall, the permanent collection. So we tend to talk about our temporary exhibitions a lot, and particularly the main temporary exhibition. And the curators agree with me, I think, at least they're telling me that our permanent collection isn't displayed and isn't as kind of synthetic and easy to move through as it should be, right? So that's the first thing. We're going to reinstall the entire permanent collection, focusing on getting it's good, yeah. So, and that's fun. They're game. I'm game. We're going to do it. And I give them an 18-month deadline. And that's so that they don't spend too much money and they don't overthink it, right? So that's how we're going to move fast. The second thing is this kind of question of access, about price point and things like that, where actually Rocco, who's our head of finance, has developed for me a pretty complex model so I can change numbers and see what happens, because I am fiscally quite conservative, actually. And then the third is marketing. Our marketing is, we still have like a print marketing department and a social media, and digital is someplace else. So it's lots of good people, but we don't have that whole system working, and we live in a world of marketing. And I think marketing is very important for bringing new people in. And you'll see probably a lot of stripping back and simplifying messages to what we do, which is art and education, right? It's about art and learning. That's what we do. So my hope is you'll see that over the next year to 18 months.
Stephan, what is the best lesson you've ever learned from an artist? There's a whole bunch of them. So one I would say is artists are really, really, really experts in failure, right? They are, and we have a lot to learn from that. Like, to make a great work of art, you have to go through just incredible amounts of work and failure. The end product might be pretty simple, but I think that they have a comfort to experiment and fail that successful entrepreneurs would wish they had, because their artists are very good at that, and it's incredibly tough. I mean, my one-liner is, if you have any other option, don't be an artist. But if you got to do it, right? But it's so that's one, and then that kind of like seeing the world in a fresh way. And I can point to a bazillion works of art. Tara Donovan takes straws and, makes a wall that size with straws all lined up. And you're just like, wow, I just thought it was plastic waste before. And so, how certain artists can really get you to see things in a fresh way. That's What was your best failure?
Oh my God. How much time do you have? Best failure. There was a show I did. So I worked at Shelburne Museum. The founder of the museum was Electra Havemeyer-Webb, who was a great collector. I mean, about 150,000 things. Really great collector. And so I was interested in this, what about this idea of collecting? And so we went out and we gave 10 people $1,000 to go on eBay and buy things to create collections, right? And so, and the idea was like, okay, you got ask these people to buy things, you show the work, so 10 collectors who you've selected buy things on eBay, you put the collection up, and at the end of the show you sell it, right? As this kind of exhibition idea. I thought it was an interesting exhibition idea. A couple people did really well. Bianca Jagger, she did amazing, super smart. With all due respect, there was one other collector, Beth DeWoody, who did a fantastic job. But most people really sucked at that. And my mistake there is I had outsourced the curatorial voice, right? And actually curators do matter, right? And so even though these people were pretty sophisticated who we asked, 2 of them were kind of good, and the other ones didn't really hit the junior curator level, It was so that was ultimately a failure because the show was bad, right? The idea I thought was interesting. Glad I tried it, but meh.
So what makes a great curator?
There are many different types of curators, so not every curator has the same strength. Some curators' strength is forming a relationship with collectors and things come in. Other people are extraordinary scholars and frame fields and frame how we look at the world. Other people are connoisseurs who go in really deep. So there's not just one thing. I think you got to look at the curatorial team and how does each individual member be part of the team, and how do they move the ball forward that's just not just about them, right? It's ultimately we're an institution that serves the public. So, yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about Toronto and Toronto artists. And I don't think I would be exaggerating when I say there's a long-standing feeling among many of Toronto's artists that the AGO is probably not as engaged as it could be in collecting and exhibiting their work. And I'm wondering, to what extent do you feel it's the AGO's responsibility to cultivate and create platform for Toronto's artists?
So we had actually kind of a interesting and fun, it was fun, hard sometimes to hear, a cocktail party for about, a couple hundred artists in Gallery Italia, and 3 different artists spoke and made it really clear that the relationship between the AGO and local artists wasn't where people wanted to be. So a couple things. One is, no matter how much we do, we will never meet the desired demand. Okay, we can't give everybody a solo show, and that's really what everybody wants. Okay, but flipping it back, what I do believe that small groups of artists emerge together and create something that's more important than just their work. It's a group of artists. It's the Impressionists. It's Jasper Johns and Rauschenberg. Right? There's always these groups and these groups are almost always framing important conversations that are not important to Toronto, not important to the AGO, but they're globally important conversations. So my challenge back to the artist is, what's the conversation that you're defining, and are you then making a product that is excellent, world-class? Because I would love to show those works and also help promote those to a global conversation. I think that Toronto's, and one of the reasons we're here, it's, in my opinion, it's probably the most civil and successful major city in North America, right? I don't say that lightly. We can be critics of Toronto, but the reality is most things are working really well. So I think it's important that the artists own that and frame some interesting questions and conversations that we can engage them with and help show it to our audience. Our first obligation is to our public.
My question was, have you taken the TTC yet?
Yeah. I've got a Presto card.
Give it some time.
Yeah. It's all terribly relevant. You have public transportation.
Just to talk a little bit more about, institutional obligations and representation. Over the past number of years, amidst the Idle No More movement and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action, I think there's a growing recognition that Indigenous art, stories, and territories should be recognized, given prominence within Canadian institutions. There's lots of dialogue around these issues and ideas. From your perspective, and I know you're new to Canada, and I know you're still getting into some of these issues, but how should an institution like the AGO engage these issues and enact these calls to action?
So we spend a lot of time in Hawaii. That First Nation cultures are living, breathing, dynamic cultures. I do not personally yet have a strong relationship, but I think the first question is we should ask permission to engage in people's culture. So that's the first thing. And that's got to be built on honest, sincere relationships that are mutually trusting. So I don't want to be the American who comes in here and then suddenly the champion of First Nations work when I don't actually know the first thing about it and I don't have those relationships. I'm very interested in developing them, but the first thing is let's make sure there's a level of sincerity there, that we're not showing First Nations work to make us feel better, right? That it's got to be more deep than that. I do, and I'm very supportive. I mean, the AGO, I don't know if it's public yet. Well, I'll make it public. We've got a position open for curator of First Nations Indigenous art. It's the first time we're doing that, and our hope is that's really kind of we hire somebody who's an expert. So, but I didn't have anything to do with that. That's like the curatorial team, and Andrew Hunter is very committed. So what's interesting to me is, and this might relate a bit, we've seen this incredible explosion in the States in the last 5 years, really, of African-American artists being really recognized. It really getting a lot of acknowledgement and framing the conversations. Now, these artists have been working for 20 or 30 years. They've just kind of pumped. And I think one of the reasons they have is because the content is very interesting and it's really good and it's important and it's difficult, right? They framed tough issues. That small group of people framing an important issue, that's important for us to know. So my gut sense is there's something happening like that in the First Nations community, communities, I'll say plural, but it is wonderful to see then people just overnight be recognized as these extraordinarily important cultural producers, although they've been working for a long time, right? The public's just caught up. So I want to make sure that we're part of that conversation and encouraging it.
To that end, I think there's a thread you could trace through recent programming at the AGO. I think about our Ai Weiwei exhibition. I think of the Jean-Michel Basquiat exhibition, the Outsiders show that recently closed, some of the work we do in programming. We've partnered with our Black Lives Matter Toronto Coalition. We did some work relative to the I Don't Know More movement. To what extent do you think institutions like the AGO should be engaged in these kinds of political discourse, I think through the lens of art, and are institutions political?
So yes, every institution by its nature is political, and every work of art by its nature is political, right? So let's not pretend like minimalism doesn't have a politic, right? The Vietnam War is going on, and we're going to create a grid of gray lines on white paper. That's interesting, actually, right? That there's this, what is said and what's not said is inherently political. Let's look at the other options. If we don't have those conversations within our culture, civic, and educational institutions, where are those conversations going to happen? And what's the result of that? I would much rather have those conversations happening within a place that's committed to civil conversation, excellence, discourse, than have it happening, with some assault weapons. Yeah?
Stephan, what's the best exhibition you've ever worked on? What stands out? What's your favorite? When you think back, what really...
That I've worked on personally?
Yeah.
There was a show, and I actually credit Will with the initial idea, Tattoo Honolulu. Honolulu, the museum was kind of unsure of its direction. The curatorial staff was good, but not sure where we're going. We were having a hard time engaging the community. And kind of you step back and you look at where was the interesting, important artistic work happening in Honolulu. And while they are good painters and good sculptors, it was really in the tattooing. It's this merger of the Japanese tradition, the Polynesian tradition, the Hawaiian tradition, and the military tradition, right? The largest naval base in the world is there. And so we went as a team to different tattoo studios, and nobody was an expert in tattooing, and we were looking at tattooing from an aesthetic point of view and a interesting, like, are they technically good? Do they have something to say? And it was amazing. I mean, these artists are great, and then they invited their best clients to come in and get photographed, right? And so it was these different tattooing traditions, and about 10 different artists were represented. And then the other half of the show was looking at, say, ethnographic drawings of Native Hawaiians or Japanese prints that inspired the uke-oe, which is inspired of the Japanese tradition of tattooing. In the moment that just kind of, so huge numbers of people came to the opening, a totally different demographic. With one show, we essentially rebranded the museum. Couple interesting things. One is it turns out that most of the artists already had a relationship to the museum because the museum had an art school and they went to figure drawing classes. Because tattooing, you've got to have your hand skills have got to be, on one hand, incredibly conservative. Like, these are guys, men and women, who are drawing and getting paid $200 an hour for it, and it's a combat sport. Who's the best one? So it's interesting. But the moment that was just kind of like, so at the opening there was a woman, older woman, who was crying, Filipina woman, who was a mom of one of the artists, and she had actually been very embarrassed that her son was a tattoo artist, and she comes to, the fancy institution, and there's several thousand people there, and her son is being toasted as one of the cultural leaders, great artists of Honolulu, and she's trying to reconcile the difference between her shame that she had had up to that point and what was happening at that moment where she was acknowledging, wow, it was changing her life and changing her family's life. It was a good show.
That's a good one. Yeah. Have you seen the tattoo show at the ROM yet?
I have not. It came out of Paris. I look forward to seeing it, though.
Yeah. Okay, so you've talked a little bit already about what we can expect to see happening at the AGO over the next 12 months. I want to think about 10 years down the line. If you're successful, what will be happening here at the AGO?
I think we have the opportunity to frame and structure and promote global conversations. It's huge, but I just think the city's ready for it, the institution, Matthew, and an incredible team here of donors. None of this couldn't have happened without Ken Thompson's generosity. Be really clear about that. They've transformed this institution. We're 9th, 10th largest museum in North America, and I think that if we do our right, we'll through art frame major conversations that the world needs to have. We'll create exhibitions that get exported, that go to major places around the world, and hopefully make this world a little more civil.
And what gives you hope that you can achieve that?
I had the good fortune of having about 50 conversations with individual staff members. So yes, I've gotten to know the leadership team here, but I've had one-on-one meetings with 50 people, 15, 20 minutes, staff members, dishwasher, night security guard, etc. And the human potential in this building is extraordinary, and we can't do it without them. Because it's not just me, it's again team sport, and they know why they're here, which is nice.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we wanted to leave some time to open up questions to the audience and give you a chance to ask Stephan the burning questions that you have. So Kathleen has a microphone on this side and Annie's over there. Please do wait for the microphone because we're live streaming and we want the people at home to hear.
Very interesting. A question about collaboration amongst cultural institutions in Toronto. There's a very interesting multi-year project going on right now between the AGO and the Toronto Symphony called the Decades Project. And I'm wondering if you have some ideas about how different major cultural institutions in Toronto might have that kind of very fertile collaboration.
So the chair of the board of the AGO is miles ahead of all of us. She pulled together a meeting of the chairs of the boards of the 8 largest cultural organizations in Toronto. And basically, we're all getting marching orders from our board chairs to work together. The reality is that Toronto consistently presents itself to the outside world as smaller than it actually is, and we don't go into the New York market or the LA market or the Chicago market or the London market as a collective to brand Toronto as a cultural destination. And I think that we need to partner with the ROM, the major institutions, so we can have the financial muscle to go into these markets and to say, hey, come here. So that's the first thing, is about getting the world to see us as that. And then there's been some pretty great, we're working with the ballet too, where basically there's a choreographer who's doing new work inspired by Lauren Harris.
Robert Benet.
You know more about this than I do, but there's a ballet connection there. And then currently the AGO has one of its major contemporary pieces at Luminato, which is, if you go to Hearn Power Plant, just go to Luminato is the first thing. But there's a sculpture by Pierre Huyghe of a nude, a woman, and we've spent a couple years growing a beehive on her head. And so it's really, really beautiful. If you become an Instagram friend of mine at Stephan Jost AGO, you can see a video of it. But don't go if you're allergic to bees. There's about 10,000 of them.
Hello. My name is Alan Cullen. I am hearing impaired. I've acquired a brain injury, which has given me dyslexia. Do you recognize something called disability art? And being a person with dyslexia, do you consider that a disability, or did you receive help? And so you get into the art world?
So the question is about dyslexia, basically, if I understand correctly, and do I see it as
dyslexia and being a person with disabilities entering the art world.
Yeah, so everybody has a different perception of it, and everybody has a different degree on it. I actually don't see it for me as oddly, I feel like it's become an advantage. I remember So I was a very mixed student. I would get D's, whatever, A's, whatever. But I remember walking into my first art history class and being like, oh, this is really easy, because I see the world, and that may be because of that. So there's certain things like I can't do, like I can't read a script in front of an audience because I'm spending so much brain space just reading the words. So I don't read scripts. Okay, I just, but you develop a ability to talk for an hour and a half without any script. Okay, great, easy. So
easy. We've got some questions in the front here.
Hi, I'm Boyu, and first of all, let me say how much I love the fact that you were an art nerd. That you were talking about the politics and minimalism and Dutch and Flemish art, and I think that matters a lot as the head of an art institution, that the enthusiasm and passion carries through. So it's my first question, I guess, is what was your specialty in terms of art and Dutch and Flemish art? And then I'll finish the second question. And the second one, you mentioned that you had great success engaging audiences under 40 from diverse backgrounds in Honolulu, and you project that to be one of your objectives working in Toronto. So I guess my question would be, how do you see the AGO providing programs or exhibitions that draw them in, not just for a big party, which is great, but how do you plan to engage them in looking at and enjoying and talking about art?
So there's a couple of questions in there. First one is, I actually believe that programming is the primary driver for the younger generation, and I'm going to be upfront. I think parties where you learn something is great, and I don't necessarily place a value judgment on whether you attend an art history lecture or go to a party where there's culture imbued in it. The job of the programmers is to make sure that party is really smart. So, for example, I think more people learned about Persian New Year through a party which had a Persian theme than would have learned if they sat in a lecture for an hour and heard an art historian talk about it. So the first thing is, yes, I believe programming is part of it, and yes, I believe party is part of it. Yep. And let's just remind ourselves that donor openings are essentially parties, right? Yep. So the other part of that question is my background of expertise. So as an undergraduate, I did Dutch and Flemish art. I studied I wrote my undergraduate thesis on the stained glass windows of St. John's Kerk in Gouda, 16th century Dutch stained glass windows. It's pretty specific. I spent a year working on that. And then in graduate school, I did landscape photographs by P.H. Emerson, who nobody's heard of. Well, actually Maya's heard of him. But landscape photographs by P.H. Emerson, which is flat, marshy areas of eastern England. So, that'll get people excited. But they're extraordinarily beautiful and incredibly important, but the top line marketing isn't very good on that one.
Yeah. Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
And there's a question just behind.
Hello. Years ago, one of Canada's top government-sponsored art galleries, I think was the National Gallery in Ottawa, purchased a painting, and it was a canvas painted white, and they paid $1 million for it. Would you ever purchase a painting of white canvas for $1 million? Would you ever authorize that for the AGO?
Sure. This is, I think if I'm right, this is a painting by Barnett Newman, right? So,
yes.
Yeah, so absolutely, and it was the best purchase they ever did. Let me start with that. And I had an experience with a Barnett Newman painting at Oberlin. Oberlin has one called One Mint from 1949. It's a black canvas with a white stripe down the middle. And it is one of the most profound paintings, in my opinion. And when I started working there, I hated it. And so I visited a lot. And this painting was created by basically putting a piece of tape on a canvas, painting the canvas, and in one moment zipping it off. And so that creates it. And to me, it represents this, and when you read about Barnett Newman, it's kind of that moment of creation when God separates dark from lightness, right? When the world is created, it's the first landscape. It's super simple, but at some moment, darkness separates from lightness, and that's one act, and it's a profound act, and everything cascades from that. And to create a painting that's from one motion that creates that, pretty damn good.
I've got one over here, Annie.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for your very stimulating presentation. No doubt your super social personality will open many doors. My question is, I read that 50% of the population speak neither of our two official languages. How will they know about this wonderful place when they are perhaps not media informed?
Just a quick correction. The statistic is that 47% of people who live in Toronto, their mother tongue is neither English nor French, although most people do speak English primarily as a language that they use here in Toronto.
Good question. How do you engage new communities? So we can talk about social media, all that. Our first job is to get funding so we have strong Wi-Fi signal everywhere. Right? Like, we can talk about all the bells and whistles, but if there's not good Wi-Fi signals, you're out. But the second is, this is our friend, really our friend. Because, you know, I spent 2.5 weeks not so long ago in rural India, south central India. I mean, this is rural India, and these are everywhere. They're everywhere. And so the question is how do we use technology to engage people, and how do we make the museum more accessible through technology as our friend? And so I think there's huge opportunity there, and I think we're probably just at the very beginning. I mean, we're redesigning our website, and you know, the aha is like, we're not redesigning the website for the desktop. Most people enter our website through their phone. It's all, you know, the desktops, there are not going to be desktops in 20 years, right? It's just, right? It's not, so it's changing so quickly. And if we had redesigned our website 2 years ago, we would have redesigned it on the website, right? For your desktop. So it's exciting to me, and we're going to get it wrong all the time, but technology is our friend in terms of engaging communities.
Sorry, I'm going to have to read it. You mentioned the internet and social media. I was curious what your view is on open data, the idea that digital data about items in the AGO collection should be freely available to everyone to use and republish without restrictions for researchers, scholars, and the general public.
Okay, so the question is should we basically try to get our images from our collection free, open distribution? So, and data. So, philosophically, I believe that restrictions that we place on images, etc., from our collection is anti-mission. Our mission is to distribute knowledge, not to restrict it. Okay, that's my philosophical point of view. The difficult thing there is that there's also something called copyright law, which we also have to respect, and there's also artists' rights, which we have to respect. But where we can, I'm going to be pushing to have increased distribution, and I don't really care how people use the image, right? If there's the massacre of the innocents, you know, my hope is we get to a point where, yeah, you want to use that? Please do, for whatever reason you want. How we can get images within the world is a good thing. Now, it's a lot easier for me to say it than actually do it. And there's a lot of rules, regulations, and copyright, and I'm not an expert in copyright, particularly in Canada. I actually know nothing about it. But that's my general philosophical approach is our job is to share knowledge, not to restrict it.
For one last question.
Hello, welcome to Toronto. My question is rather broad and might be a little bit premature since you've only been here for 2 months, but as far as your experience with Toronto goes, when you've learned about it, being here and from your research before coming here, from the lens of the AGO, what do you think are some of the innate things about Toronto that work in AGO's favor and against it, and how do you plan to address or leverage those things?
So what are the things about Toronto that work in our favor, basically? Is that the question? So yes, I'm 8 weeks into the job, so I'm claiming zero expertise on Toronto. But the economic and cultural momentum, and is very, very, very much in favor of Toronto and our cultural institutions. So if we can harness some of the energy of the city, that's incredibly important, and also to work collaboratively with the other cultural institutions. That's really, that will be important as well. I'm actually very interested in hearing about how people would describe Toronto, because I'm hearing, I see this vibrant city, 6+ million people with extraordinary resources, relatively incredible governance compared to most places in the world, you know, an intellectual community, strong universities, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. I also feel like people have a hard time describing it, right? And that's an opportunity for us, but my hope is over the next year I start to hear descriptions that might be something that we can push institutionally forward. But I'd love to hear your opinion on that. So email Sean if you have ideas, and he'll get them to me. Or email me. I'm at Stephan_Jost at Honolulu, AGO.
No, you didn't.
Yeah, there we go.
AGO.net.
We're going to change it to AGO.ca this fall. So
coming soon. Okay, Stephan Jost. Thank you very much. Sean O'Neill, thank you very much. It was a great conversation. I think it's really just the beginning of many conversations we'll continue to have. Thank you for giving everyone your email address. Please feel free, if we didn't get to take your questions tonight, just email Stephan. And thank you for joining us. Have a good night.